You think you know who you are, but you are a stranger to yourself. Every day, you wake up, look in the mirror, and see a carefully constructed mask, a fragile facade designed to hide the uncomfortable truth. There is another version of you, a darker, older, and far more powerful entity dwelling beneath the surface. It watches in silence. It waits in the cold depths of your mind. And when you least expect it, it pulls the strings. Most people live their entire lives completely oblivious to the invisible master directing their choices, their fears, and their most destructive impulses. They blame the world for their endless suffering, blind to the agonizing fact that their worst enemy is buried deep within their own psyche. This is not a metaphor. This is the ultimate, inescapable reality of the human condition. You cannot conquer the external world until you have first conquered the labyrinth of yourself. And you cannot conquer yourself until you have willingly descended into the abyss and faced the shadow. Welcome, seeker, to the hardest journey you will ever undertake. This is the path of self-mastery. We live in an age of profound superficiality, where an unhealthy obsession with the light has entirely blinded us to the profound lessons hiding within the darkness. Modern society relentlessly tells us to be positive, to focus only on our shining virtues, and to deliberately ignore the sinister whispers of our inner demons. We are taught to sweep our envy, our raging anger, our base lust, and our insatiable greed under the psychological rug, pretending they simply do not exist. But repressing these fundamental elements does not extinguish them. It merely feeds them, making them exponentially stronger. Like a starved, neglected beast locked away in a dark basement, your ignored urges grow feral. They quietly gnaw at the very foundations of your sanity. They seep like poison into your dreams. They secretly corrupt your closest relationships, and they ruthlessly sabotage your greatest ambitions just as you are about to reach the summit. You often wonder why you suddenly act against your own best interests, why you inexplicably snap at the people you love the most, why you feel a sudden, uncontrollable surge of bitter resentment when someone else achieves the success you crave. You desperately convince yourself it is just a passing bad mood, or the result of overwhelming stress, or a completely justifiable reaction to an unfair, unforgiving world. But these are all elaborate lies, convenient fictions you weave every single day to protect your fragile ego from a horrifying realization. You are not fully in control of the vehicle you call your life. There is a fractured, bleeding piece of your soul, violently severed from your conscious awareness, operating silently in the shadows. This is exactly what the ancient thinkers knew. They understood that true, lasting wisdom requires a brutal, unflinching honesty about one's own immense capacity for malevolence. To deny your internal darkness is to willingly surrender your autonomy to it. If you do not courageously drag your demons out into the harsh light of day, they will inevitably drag you down into the permanent dark. The invisible master never sleeps, and it never forgives ignorance. More than 2,000 years ago, the legendary Greek philosopher Plato painted a haunting, timeless picture of human ignorance. In his famous allegory of the cave, he vividly described a group of miserable prisoners chained inside a damp, dark cavern since early childhood. Their heavy restraints hold their heads completely fixed, forcing them to look only at the blank stone wall before them. Far behind them burns a roaring fire, and between that blazing fire and the captive prisoners, unseen puppet masters hold up various objects and effigies. The prisoners see only the flickering shadows cast upon the wall, Having never known anything else in their miserable existence, they entirely mistake these two-dimensional phantoms for absolute reality. They passionately argue about the shadows. They build their entire understanding of the universe around these fleeting shapes, completely and utterly unaware that they are trapped in a grand, orchestrated illusion. Listen closely. You are currently in the cave. We all are. The dancing shadows on the wall are the powerful illusions of your unchecked ego. The comforting stories you endlessly tell yourself about your infallible goodness, your perpetual victimhood, and your unassailable righteousness. You gaze at the dim silhouettes and genuinely believe they are the ultimate truth. You stubbornly refuse to turn your head, because turning around means finally facing the blinding, searing fire of reality. It means realizing that your entire perception of the world has been fundamentally distorted by your own repressed, unacknowledged nature. To forcibly break those chains is an incredibly painful, profoundly disorienting process. It demands that you ruthlessly question absolutely everything you thought you knew about your own character. It requires the immense courage to admit that the puppet master ruining your life is not society, or your flawed parents, or the indifferent universe. The puppet master is your own unexamined, chaotic mind. When you adamantly refuse to look inward, you choose to remain a helpless prisoner. You stumble blindly through life, constantly reacting to phantoms. You exhaust yourself fighting imaginary, pointless battles. You let invisible psychological chains dictate your entire path. The agonizing ascent out of the cave is not a journey of physical distance, but of immense psychological depth. It is a terrifying, steep climb toward genuine self-awareness, where every single step violently strips away another comforting layer of your false identity. Only by confronting the burning fire of truth, by enduring the scorching pain of realization, can you eventually step out into the blinding, beautiful light of the actual world. But make no mistake, the exit is guarded by the very shadow you have spent your whole life running from. The renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung was the pioneer who finally gave a definitive name to this hidden, submerged realm of the human psyche. He called it the shadow. For Jung, the shadow was not something inherently evil. It was simply the vast, unorganized repository of absolutely everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Every single trait, impulsive urge, and taboo desire that our strict parents, our rigid culture, or our own fragile moral compass deemed unacceptable, was violently pushed down into the deepest recesses of the unconscious. As we grew from children into adults, we systematically carved away massive pieces of our authentic, natural selves just to fit into the narrow, suffocating mold of societal expectation. We became fractured entities. We became dangerously incomplete. Jung urgently warned that the shadow is not a dead graveyard of memories. It is a living, breathing, immensely powerful aspect of our personality. It possesses its own vital energy, its own distinct will, and its own cunning intelligence. Everyone carries a shadow, Jung famously wrote, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. When you foolishly choose to ignore this inner beast, it certainly does not die. It goes completely rogue. It finds a twisted way to express itself through passive aggression, deeply irrational phobias, sudden terrifying outbursts of rage, and profound, inexplicable self-sabotage. The shadow operates stealthily, easily bypassing your rational, logical defenses and seizing absolute control of your behavior when your conscious guard is down. Think for a moment of the loud moral crusader who is shockingly caught in a humiliating, scandalous affair, or the hyper-agreeable, exhausted people-pleaser who suddenly erupts in a violent, uncontrollable rage over something trivial. This is the shadow taking the wheel and driving the car off the cliff. When you vehemently deny your innate capacity for destruction, you leave it completely unmonitored. You essentially allow a loaded, unstable weapon to lie unchecked in the dark corners of your mind. Jung firmly believed that the ultimate goal of human psychological development, the arduous process he called individuation, is absolutely not to eradicate the shadow. That is an impossible, foolish fantasy. The true goal is to integrate it, to firmly bring the ferocious beast to heel, to deeply understand its ancient nature, and to carefully harness its immense, primal energy for constructive, noble purposes. Remember this: a harmless, weak person is not a virtuous person. True, profound virtue is having the undeniable capacity for immense, terrifying harm, and consciously choosing not to use it. You must bravely invite your darkest demons to the dinner table, look them directly in the eye, and finally learn their true names. Confronting the shadow is not a gentle, therapeutic spa day. It is a grueling, isolated, and often terrifying descent into the most dangerous, uncharted regions of your own soul. It is a willing plunge into the abyss. Friedrich Nietzsche, the fierce, uncompromising prophet of extreme self-overcoming, famously and chillingly cautioned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." This is the ultimate, inescapable peril of serious shadow work. As you painstakingly uncover your deeply hidden resentments, your latent capacity for cruelty, and your long-buried, festering traumas, you risk being entirely consumed by their overwhelming force. The abyss is the vast, echoing, silent emptiness where all your comfortable illusions go to die. When you dare to gaze deeply into it, you see the terrifying reflection of your own potential for absolute, unrestricted darkness. You realize, with a sickening drop in your stomach, that under the right set of desperate circumstances, you are entirely capable of the very atrocities you so loudly condemn in others. This realization is profoundly shattering. It completely destroys the comforting, childlike dichotomy of simple good versus evil, permanently replacing it with a complex, terrifying, and infinite spectrum of human capability. But you must hold the gaze. You must absolutely not flinch or look away. If you turn away in cowardice, the abyss immediately wins. If you let the sheer horror of your own dual nature paralyze you, you slowly become the very monster you so desperately fear. The real trick is to stare directly into the howling void with a mindset of radical, unflinching acceptance, to fully acknowledge the terrifying darkness without ever surrendering your core values to it. Nietzsche deeply understood that genuine greatness is only ever born from this searing crucible. To become the Übermensch, the elevated higher man, one must effectively synthesize their highest, most noble ideals with their deepest, most primal and savage drives. You absolutely do not conquer the abyss by trying to fill it with cheap, empty platitudes or modern toxic positivity. You conquer it by standing resolutely at the very edge, feeling the freezing, desolate wind of the void directly on your face, and boldly declaring your absolute, unyielding sovereignty over every single terrifying inch of your vast internal landscape. If there is one solitary writer in human history who mapped the jagged, twisting contours of the shadow with truly unparalleled, terrifying precision. It was the Russian mastermind, Fyodor Dostoevsky. In his monumental, unsettling masterpiece, Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky masterfully introduced the world to the underground man, a bitterly cynical, desperately isolated, and agonizingly hyper-conscious figure who stews eternally in his own toxic resentment. The underground man perfectly represents the human shadow fully unleashed, a wretched soul entirely poisoned by its own unexpressed acidic venom. He is constantly paralyzed by neurotic overthinking, yet fiercely driven by pure, unadulterated spite. He actively, intentionally sabotages his own potential happiness simply to prove to the universe that he still has free will, even if that will is entirely, hopelessly destructive. Dostoevsky deeply understood a terrifying, unspoken truth about fundamental human nature. We are simply not the purely rational, logical creatures seeking our own constant benefit that we pretend to be. Sometimes, we secretly crave utter chaos. Sometimes, we deeply desire profound suffering, both our own and the suffering of others. The underground man issues a stark warning that if a man were miraculously given a perfect, utopian paradise, where all his needs were instantly met and all pain was erased, he would deliberately smash it into a million pieces just to re-establish his chaotic independence. This deeply irrational, intensely destructive urge is not an anomaly. It is a core, foundational component of the universal human shadow. When you stubbornly refuse to face your own inner underground man, you inevitably project his ugly features onto the external world. Psychological projection is the shadow's absolute favorite, most insidious defense mechanism. You unconsciously take the absolute ugliest, most shameful parts of yourself, strip them from your own pristine identity, and paste them violently onto the innocent people around you. That specific colleague you find so unbearably arrogant and obnoxious, they might just be perfectly reflecting your own deeply repressed, desperate desire for public recognition. The frustrating family member whose selfishness constantly drives you insane, they may merely be openly acting out the very necessary boundaries you are far too afraid and weak to set for yourself. We fiercely and loudly condemn in others the exact sins we secretly, shamefully harbor in our own hearts. Projection is a fundamentally cowardly attempt to maintain our own perceived, artificial purity, but it is a complete, devastating delusion. As long as you are endlessly fighting the shadow out there in the world, you are entirely losing the most critical war in here. To heal the painful divide within your psyche, you must actively reclaim your vicious projections. You must totally own your personal filth. You must look in the mirror and finally admit that the miserable underground man is not a distant stranger. He is the silent, constant partner in absolutely all of your daily transactions. How, then, do we break this endless, destructive cycle? How do we successfully integrate the wild beast and permanently reclaim our deeply fractured psyche? We must turn to the timeless, pragmatic wisdom of the ancient Stoics. The great Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius was not a modern psychoanalyst, but his legendary meditations remain one of the absolute greatest, most practical manuals for shadow work ever put to paper. Aurelius was, at the time, the single most powerful man on the entire planet, constantly surrounded by manipulative sycophants, deadly political treachery, and endless, grueling frontier war. Yet, he recognized that his primary, most important battlefield was located entirely within his own mind. He profoundly understood that true, lasting empire always begins with total internal dominion. Aurelius practiced a relentless, almost punishing form of daily self-examination. He absolutely did not shy away from his many glaring flaws. He wrote private notes to himself in the cold quiet of his military tent, deliberately and methodically stripping away his own massive ego. If anyone can properly refute me, show me I'm making a critical mistake, or looking at things from the completely wrong perspective, I'll gladly, instantly change. It's the objective truth I'm constantly after, and the truth never permanently harmed anyone. This precise attitude is the absolute essence of effectively confronting the shadow, the unwavering, ironclad commitment to objective, harsh truth over subjective, comfortable delusion. The ancient Stoics rigorously taught that we must constantly observe our rising emotions and dark impulses without ever being enslaved by them. When a dark, violent, or greedy thought suddenly arises in your mind, do not suppress it in panic. Do not instantly judge it and bury it. Simply observe it with cold, clinical detachment. Interrogate it like a prisoner of war. Ask yourself, where exactly does this vile impulse come from? What fractured part of my soul is desperately crying out for immediate attention? Aurelius wisely recognized that we are all deeply, intricately connected to the entire, messy human tapestry, explicitly including the very parts we find most repulsive and unforgivable. When constantly faced with the shocking cruelty or blind ignorance of others, he calmly reminded himself that they, too, are merely being driven blindly by their own unexamined, chaotic shadows. He wrote, "When you wake up in the early morning, tell yourself immediately, the people I will inevitably deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, extremely arrogant, deeply dishonest, bitterly jealous, and profoundly surly. They are like this simply because they can't accurately tell good from evil." But the crucial, defining pivot for Marcus Aurelius was always directed strictly inward. He intimately knew that the only real evil that could ever truly harm his character was the evil he voluntarily allowed to fester and grow in his own soul. The Stoic mirror is utterly unforgiving. It accurately reflects every single hidden blemish, every pathetic weakness, and every deeply selfish hidden motive. But looking unflinchingly into that brutal mirror is the only reliable way to forge a truly unbreakable, diamond-like character. Genuine integration means taking the chaotic raw material of your shadow, your burning aggression, your rigid stubbornness, your ruthless ambition, and intentionally refining it through the purifying fire of strict reason. Uncontrolled aggression slowly becomes powerful, disciplined assertiveness. Blind stubbornness is transformed into unyielding, noble perseverance. Selfish ambition elevates into a tireless drive to serve the greater good of humanity. The shadow is definitively not a permanent curse. It is a massive, overflowing reservoir of entirely untapped raw power, desperately waiting to be disciplined and directed. The long, arduous journey of integrating the shadow is unequivocally the most difficult, exhausting task a human being can possibly undertake. It is not a weekend workshop. It is the grueling, relentless work of an entire lifetime. There is no final, triumphant finish line, no ultimate, permanent victory where the darkness is entirely vanquished and you are left in pure light. The yawning abyss will always be there, waiting at the edge of your vision. The wild beast will always breathe softly, patiently, in the background of your mind. But as you continuously and bravely shine the brilliant light of focused consciousness into the forgotten, cobwebbed corners of your deep mind, the internal dynamic fundamentally, permanently shifts. You are no longer the helpless, dancing puppet. You officially become the master of the stage. When you finally stop running in terror from yourself, a profound, entirely new sense of peace begins to slowly take root in your core. It is not the fragile, naive, easily shattered peace of someone who simply ignores clear and present danger. It is the deep, heavy, unshakable tranquility of a battle-hardened warrior who intimately knows their own formidable strength and fully, soberly understands their own terrifying capacity for absolute destruction. You completely stop wasting your precious, limited energy trying to constantly maintain a flawless, exhausting, public facade. You willingly embrace the messy, deeply contradictory, absolutely terrifying, and incredibly beautiful reality of your own complete humanity. To truly master your shadow is to finally achieve genuine, psychological wholeness. It is the ultimate realization that the shining light and the pitch black are not bitter enemies fighting for control, but rather two essential halves of a singular, magnificent whole. You desperately need the heavy gravity of the shadow to keep your lofty, airy ideals firmly grounded in the gritty reality of the world. You absolutely need the primal ferocity of the beast to effectively protect what you truly love from those who would do it harm. So, stop hiding in the comforting illusions. Stop projecting your own unresolved failures onto the world around you. Turn around slowly, stand your ground, and finally face the roaring fire. Voluntarily descend into the dark, echoing cave of your own complex psyche. Stare deeply and relentlessly into the gaping abyss until it simply no longer terrifies you, but instead empowers you. Embrace the bitter, twisted underground man and show him the light of reason. Look relentlessly, every single day, into the unforgiving stoic mirror. The greatest, most consequential battle you will ever fight is the one happening right now, silently, relentlessly, in the unexplored depths of your own soul. The ultimate choice is completely yours. Unmask the shadow right now, or let it quietly, inevitably master you forever.